like, I have a sunny disposition. I think being amongst human beings is the greatest gift we have, but it's not like I wake up in bed with my cats and I throw open the curtains. Do you know what I mean? You have to like work hard to see the world in that way, and it's not diluted.
Welcome to The Glimpse. I'm your host, Seán Hewitt. Mícheál McCann is the author of 3 pamphlets of poems, the most recent, Keeper. His first collection, Devotion, was published in 2024, and he's the 2024 Publishing Fellow at the Seamus Heaney Centre at Queen's University, Belfast. Originally from Derry City, Mícheál now lives and works in Belfast, and is our guest today on The Glimpse. Mícheál McCann's debut collection, Devotion, is many things. An inhabitation of Irish literature, an account of queer life, an exploration of love and relationships, and a light-filled and tender look at domesticity. In one time-bending sequence, McCann re-inhabits the Irish lament, originally composed by Eileen Dubh Ní Chonaill, creating a heartfelt and grief-filled reimagining which places a queer love story right at the heart of the Irish tradition. His poems are unusually open and welcoming, and I think full of a sense of gratitude for the small moments in life that can act as a solace in an increasingly fraught world. Mícheál McCann, welcome to The Glimpse. It's so good to have you here.
Thanks, Sean. You've said nice things. I appreciate it.
You're very welcome. Where are you speaking to us from?
So, from the Seamus Heaney Centre, actually. I barreled down here from work up in the mountains in West Belfast, and it's very foggy. You can't see 50 feet in front of you. It's a very this is my type of winter evening, not particularly festive. So.
Okay, That's very different weather in Belfast to what we have here, which is unusually clear for Dublin.
Oh.
As I mentioned in the intro there, this year your debut collection, Devotion, came out. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about how the past year, since the launch of the book, has been for you.
How's it been? So wonderful. It's one of those things where it's wonderful because you're thinking about publishing changes entirely when you're fortunate enough to publish a book. You strive for so long. I mean, we met when you had just put out Lantern, I remember, and I was trying to put out pamphlets and stuff, and I think you have this idea of like a quest, when I reach the collection stage, but you're still as unsure of yourself and plodding along, and you're just sort of doing the same things, but in the way you are at that stage. So it's great. It's humbling, It's been really good for that reason, and I feel very lucky, like, that it's been held so conscientiously by Gallery. They've done a really beautiful job with it, especially with the lament and stuff. So,
how long were you working on the book?
Probably the guts of about 2 years, probably. A lot of the poems were written from about 2021 onwards. The lament in and of itself was about 6 months, where I feel like I blacked out and came to, and then just had this like 35-page long poem that sort of still mystifies me a little bit, and then other poems just come in that sort of organic way that yourself. I don't know, it's such a thrill, isn't it? I remember talking to people who think that a book's so organic. Do you know what I mean? I just think it's not a mechanical process.
Did it change along the way a lot, the book?
In the way that I suppose I worked with Leontia Flynn on my PhD, and I don't think the poems changed, but maybe my eye for how poems should look changed. Do you know?
Yeah. I mean, it's a sort of evolution, maybe, but not necessarily always in a linear direction. I think it's like a folding inwards of inspiration and different sorts of language. The title in your book is Keen for A, and Irish readers would know that poem from school, I guess, the Keen for Art O'Leary. Would you tell listeners a little bit about that poem? Some of them may be unfamiliar with it, and what drew you to it.
Yeah. So the Keen for Art O'Leary was never written down, it was uttered by Eileen Dubh Ní Chonaill about 251 years ago. Actually, last year it was his 250th anniversary, obviously. She was a noblewoman of sorts. Her husband, Art O'Leary, was killed by British forces in Cork at that time, and keening was a sort of a profession. Professional whaling women, but actually in the prior to that period, even men would have done it as well. But this woman uttered this keen, so extraordinary, so sort of full of anger and this frightening desire for her husband, that people were like so stunned that these other keeners took register and noted down the poem. And it's sort of long and frightening, really frightening. And the thing that grabbed me, I remember reading it for the first time, and there's a scene where she comes across his corpse in this sort of like little hilly patch, and an old woman has, she thinks, thrown like a robe over his dead bloody body, and Eileen Duffin O'Connell sticks her hands into the wounds and lifts the blood and drinks it. And as a gay person, blood is very burdened in a different way, so I suppose that was what started to set my mind going, like, I guess there's two ways to think about the past and literary canons and stuff that exclude certain kinds of people. Do you see that as like a opportunity to carve into something or move away? I suppose for me, I love Irish literature so much, and I have enough of a note of unscholarliness about me that I just thought, what would happen if I tried this? Then I did.
Which is a lovely freedom to push into, yeah. I think. It's a poem that's been translated many times by different poets and scholars from different backgrounds. When it comes to introducing that poem into your book of poems, with its sense of history, the violence in it, the kind of otherworldliness of that poem, but also, bringing it in to a queer relationship with your own poems. What does that mean to you? Or, how did you go about thinking about inhabiting that different angle on history? Because I think it's an important thing that a lot of queer writers have to think about, is kind of marking out a kind of historical reference point for their own work, and either you stand firmly in the centre of that canon, as I think that this poem does, it's such a radical thing to do, or you can kind of about face and turn against the canon completely. What was your relationship to it?
When I came across that poem, one thing that struck me was that it is a keen, but it's also a love poem, and I was trying to sort of, at that time, work through a really awful death that happened in my family, and at the same time I feel fortunate to be in a relationship that has a lot of love in it. So I think the poem pierced me in an odd way. I will say I wrote the poem without thinking of any of this. I think like all good poems, if you're thinking about reception or historicity or whatever, it's gonna not be worth toilet paper, but I guess when I finished it, I was sort of really seized by this sense, like, who am I to do this? It's because it's sort of, when you're writing about queer subjects in a context that hasn't been written about, you sort of feel like, am I standing on people's toes? Seán, I don't really know how to answer your question except to say that I was compelled to write it, and I decided to be brave and just let it.
As writers, often we're asked to kind of put logic back on a decision that we never made logically, and it can be quite difficult to retrospectively kind of come up with the origin story of something that just arrived. It seems that Devotion as a collection is fundamentally a book of love poems, or it is at least pitched towards love. But underneath it there is a lot of violence simmering, whether it's incidental violence, historical violence. Is that something that, as you were putting the book together, became apparent to you, or was it always a kind of conscious concern that you wanted to temper love with violence in the book?
I suppose I write a lot about family and the terrain in which I live, political violence, and the ramifications of that are very real. Love isn't just love blandly thrown on a wall. It's so complicated by the trajectory for which it took to manifest itself. And so, like, I think as a queer person, as a person who lives in this part of Ireland, as a person who, yeah, is just still alive in this part of Ireland, like, to not acknowledge violence is to just be locked in your room and not thinking about stuff that's happening outside.
What I thought was really beautiful about the book is the way that you had ordered the poems so that we kind of tumble through deepening understandings of the place in which the poems are being written from. And the poem that you're going to read for us emerges in some way out of that. Would you introduce the poem that you're going to read for us and tell us a little bit about it first and read it for us?
Marilyn Robinson's a very important writer to me, and one of the things I feel like I've learned from her is that it's important that we're not all recruited into the same models of thinking. I think writers are these sort of little magpies for not just thinking and creativity, but we're just sort of these like cheesecloths through which so much stuff pass. And this poem that I'm going to read was me thinking about a certain kind of knowledge that I know as a queer person is true, and also an emotional truth that I feel like I want to be a parent, right? And I guess I was wrestling with the fact that two things can be true at once,
right?
Or maybe perhaps that love breaks down book learning quite quickly. So I'll read that, because I think talking about poems is never as good as just reading them, but you're very generous. To an imagined child. Friends of certain militant dispositions would have kittens hearing me address you like this. To have a child, they say, is a heterosexual fallacy. There's enough tragedy on this drowning world without a replica of me making matters worse. And yet, book learning crumbles in the face of a child's toy, a small pink hairbrush. I dream of you to the soft cluck of knitting needles. You would know me, always in the same coat, waiting outside the school well before I had to. Maybe some part of us is meant to be weighed down, I might say to my friends. A diving line is often deployed in murky caves, so a diver can ascend to gentle water. Child, I would stand still with this line around my trunk in the shallow water of our lives, so that you can tug twice for I'm okay, daddy. Go well into your own life, and stand among flowers you cannot grow, and smile, knowing that wherever I go, you follow, as a prayer follows hope.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I was really struck by the quietness and intimacy of this poem, and I wanted to touch on the last line first, particularly as you mentioned Marilyn Robinson is one of my favourite writers too. I wonder about poems and prayers, which often kind of come up together and are sometimes seen as kindred. Does that prayer-like intention ever inform the way that you write? You know, do you ever see poems as being related to prayer?
I think so, but for me, when I'm in that zone, it doesn't come often where I want to write a poem, or, you know, like you're on a plane, for example, and this moment of clarity, that's the only way I can understand writing poems. This moment of clarity pierces you, and you can sort of take that consciousness and impress it into a poem. You know, I think that's just what a prayer is. You know, it's like a hope for, or an impression of something better or something different, or, you know, like a type of light that directs you out of the murk of your own life. So yeah, absolutely.
I think I'm really struck by the way that you describe it. You know, the fundamental thing that really rings through all of your poems is that impression of clarity, but also of hope and a sense of things might be better. Kind of at the end of stanza 3, you say, you know, there's enough tragedy on this drowning world without a replica of me making matters worse. And yet. And what another poet might have done might have been to make this a lengthy poem of critique of, you know, what other people might say and to take down. But you actually, from stanza 3, just lift into a dream, a sense of a better future or a different life. Do you find yourself approaching things positively rather than, succumbing maybe to the temptation to anger or critique or negativity? Is that something that's, apparent to you in your own writing?
It's a really beautiful question. I read a book a long time ago now by Michael Snedeker called Queer Optimism. It's a book about happiness and joy, which we know in critical writing doesn't get written about a lot. And he talks about the difference between sort of naive happiness and sort of adult informed happiness and or joy or whatever he's talking about. And to be clear, that book proceeds through suicide, of not wanting to be alive anymore and persisting. And that is what informs that sort of subjectivity you're talking about. It's I have a sunny disposition. I think being amongst human beings is the greatest gift we have, but I haven't, that's a hard one. It's not like I wake up in bed with my cats and I throw open the curtains. Do you know what I mean? You have to work hard to see the world in that way, and it's not diluted. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. I don't see much poetry by men that's looking into the kind of the domestic sphere, and that seems to me something different here. Queer domesticity seems like something that might be out of fashion, or you just don't hear about it a lot, and part of the kind of the voices in the back of your poem that might accuse you of a heterosexual fallacy are perhaps some of the reasons why we don't hear much of this really important facet of queer life. We all have home lives as well, and I think that often queer literature is looking in other places to pull away from these ideas that it might call heterosexual, or it might say are in some ways traps into which we fall after liberation, assimilation or something like that.
Sure.
It made me think about your experience with queer poetry as you started writing. I wondered what that process of discovery was like for you, and who have been your kind of guiding lights or touchstones.
I had a very formative year around the age of 19, I think, when in 1 hour was introduced to Elizabeth Bishop and Mark Doty. You can imagine how dazzling that was for me. And I go back to both of them a lot for very different reasons. I actually, to be honest, Mark Doty was Mark Doty helped me sort of write about my life in concrete terms that I never quite had access to before, but there's something about just that devastating clarity without giving anything away that Bishop has. Sylvia Plath has done as much for me as someone who shares the same sexuality as me. I've mentioned Marie Howe before. I think of all poets, living or dead, she's had the most transformative impact on me. So
yeah,
yes,
I can hear her in the background of your poems, and I think I'm glad you mentioned Mark Doty as well, because in a geeky way, there was something in some of your line breaks that I was like, oh, that's such a good line break, and then I thought, yeah, that's it's also quite a Mark Doty line break. Child, I would stand still with this line around my trunk in the shallow water, line break, or actually stanza break of our lives. And I think that Of Our Lives is such a Mark Doty-esque addition, because he has this way of pulling the apparently normal, the standing with you in water, into something kind of expansive. He has that kind of prayerful expansion in his poems that always seem to me to give them a great sense of lift and kind of the unexpected. I love him too. Okay, Mícheál McCann, we are going to take a short break now, and when we come back, you're going to tell me about one of your favourite and my favourite poets, Fiona Benson, and a poem about fireflies.
Sounds good.
We hope you're enjoying this second season of The Glimpse. It's just one small part of the Adrian Brinkerhoff Poetry Foundation.
We're the founders, Peter
and Kathy Halstead. Our goal is to make great poetry more accessible to everyone, and we do that in a variety of ways, through partnerships, our film series, this podcast, and our website, brinkerhoffpoetry.org.
We hope these works will lure you into a parallel universe, the way a Mobius strip brings you into another dimension without leaving the page you're on.
Thank you so much for listening.
Mícheál McCann, we were speaking about your poem To an Imagined Child, and now you're going to read one of my favourite poets, and I imagine your favourite poets as well, or else you wouldn't have chosen her. Fiona Benson. This is a poem from Firefly Suite. Would you tell us a little bit about why it is that you've chosen it and then read it for us?
How to summarise Fiona Benson in a few words. For anyone listening who hasn't heard of her, go and read her. She's a mixture of tender-heartedness and ferocity I've ever read. And the reason I chose this poem is that she marries technical virtuosity with incredible feeling, and isn't afraid to be very ugly.
Right.
In the poems, there's like sort of a sharp jankiness to them, and then there's also incredible control. And oh gosh, I'm actually becoming incoherent. I love her work so much.
No, I think so too. I mean, she's such a brave poet as well as an astute one, and I find her poems completely incredible. So why don't we stop gushing about it? We'll gush again afterwards. But would you read it for us?
Yes, I will read it. So this is the first poem from a sequence called Firefly Suite. So this poem's called Big Dipper Fireflies, Photinus, pyralis, and it's dedicated to Mayor Bosworth. Silently at dusk, the Big Dippers rising from the grass, green and upwards cinders, gentle wandering stars, and we two on our knees cupping them up, holding them close, like something we lost at the edge of the forest and loved. How we are enthralled as the soft green flush in the lamp we make of our hands comes and goes, how we peer into the improvised chambers we make with our fingers to see them housed, their beetle wings striped like sunflower seeds, and the tender segments of their bellies glimmering like tree sap breathing, an emerald electric pulse, as though we've been disenchanted, strangers to ourselves in multiple prisons, unleaved, unskied. I've been ready to lie down, dearest dust. I have wanted to die. Once more, in wonder, the raw green girl who lives in me still trembles, ignites, and we open our hands like books. Let them fly.
So good. I kind of want to talk about every single line in this poem.
Me too.
But when you read it, their bellies glimmering like tree sap breathing, an emerald electric pulse. And although I've never seen fireflies or Big Dipper fireflies, you almost feel that you could recreate them in your mind from this, which is a strange thing with insects as well, because they're so kind of alien to us. But even the idea of them having beetle wings striped like sunflower seeds, the tender segments of their bellies glimmering. We go from this quite otherworldly opening, which almost seems like, a fairy tale opening where at the edge of the wood there are glowing things. There's kind of even the sense of constellations and stars, and two people wandering towards it, and then zoom in straight down onto the tiniest kind of tender moment. And when I said before about Fiona Benson being a brave poet, that parenthesis towards the end of the poem is such a brave moment.
Staggering.
I've been ready to lie down, dearest dust, I have wanted to die. It just takes the heart out of you when you read that, because everything in that moment is suddenly weighted with its possible other life or its past life that seems to actually increase the form of wonder in the poem.
I think it's all about re-enchantment, like that we have these sort of improvised chambers, like low green.
Yeah.
And like this little parenthetical note doesn't detract from that, but it also, is really interesting to me about how the human spirit moves towards wonder despite, I find it so remarkable how she's managed to make that parentheses and this glimmering, glowing, moving poem work together.
Yeah, I mean, in some way, it's a poem about re-enchantment and everything that kind of entails, which seems to me a sort of redemption of things and grace, maybe, and in some ways, having the admission in parenthesis there at once kind of gives you a sense of the disenchantment that we're moving away from, and what power there must be in enchantment to do that. But also, I think in bracketing it almost comes as an aside in this moment, so it doesn't actually puncture the moment of the poem. It doesn't end there. We go straight back to the wonderful thing, and so the moment of tenderness is held within the poem.
I think it's made all the more brilliant for its presence, though. Do you know what I mean? I just brave the words you used, but I think we are like an accumulation of all the things that have brought us to the point we're at. I very much read this poem as like a flashing moment within a really extraordinarily beautiful experience where I've been ready to lie down, dearest dust, I have wanted to die, and then it goes again. It's miraculous is what I would describe this and her whole work as.
I mean, to begin a sequence like this is impressive, because where are you going to go after that? The idea of writing that poem and then sitting down and thinking, okay, and another one, is an incredible feat that I'm extremely jealous of and amazed by. I have a new sense of wonder in the world. I become very sad that I haven't seen a Big Dipper Firefly or had this moment myself.
I find myself thinking now about the term re-enchantment, because there's nothing divine going on here, like the very title of the poem, even like the little sort of Latin species note indicates like there is nothing miraculous about this, And I think an extraordinary way for me to think about this poem is this was here all along, and
I think that this poem and the sequence it was part of a project for Fiona, wasn't it, about biodiversity and insects, and I think that you can listen to the podcasts that Maya Bosworth produced of this sequence. Am I right?
I think you're right.
That's where it comes from.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that part of the precision in the language is obviously Fiona's, but it's also kind of informed by the sort of close attention that scientists do as well. And maybe the bracketed kind of species name there is a bridging of the gap between the poet's worldview. The Big Dipper Fireflies is kind of the poet's way of describing, and then the Latinate name is the scientific. And in this poem, they kind of blend together. There's such small precision in the language, and then it has this lift which feels poetic as well. I don't know. I think that there's something that feels almost collaborative about the way that this poem comes together.
I mean, I'm sure listeners are thinking this is a minute, but one of the greatest honors of my whole life is realizing that you can just live a life talking about poems. Like we've been talking about a parentheses for how long? Mm-hmm. But what we're doing in the world we live in is one of the few things that doesn't hurt anyone. We're talking about parentheses. And like, you know, but I'm serious, like, and that's so extraordinary to think.
Well, I mean, in some ways, it's, you know, you were talking about kind of the redirection of attention. And that's kind of what reading poems like this does to us. Even for a half an hour in the day, you're pulled towards an attention on something as small as a parenthesis and what it might make you feel, or how strangely brave, you know, 3 lines of poetry can be in the middle of a poem. So there is something in that. I don't think we should apologize for. Yeah. And what are you working on now?
None of your business.
I like it when people refuse to tell me these things.
This is the anecdote. I am working on my second book of poems at the minute, which sort of orbit the lives of the saints, hagiography.
Oh, okay.
Where I'm sort of zoning in and out of written lives, unwritten lives, my family, otherwise, you know, and it's fun and it's very different, and yeah, I'm writing that is what I'm doing.
That is very exciting. As I'm talking to you now, I can literally just put my hand above my bookcase and pull out the Penguin Dictionary of the Saints, which I used to have by my bed. I found it in a charity shop, and I would every night or so do, you know, letter E of the saints. And there's such incredible stories and so much variety in them. I can't wait to see what you do with them. That is very exciting news.
You're very nice.
Mícheál McCann, it has been a real pleasure talking to you. Thank you for taking the time to come on The Glimpse.
That was a gift. Thanks, Sean.
Thanks for joining us today. I'm your host, Seán Hewitt. Mícheál's poem, To an Imagined Child, is from Devotion, published in 2024 and aired with the kind permission of the author and the Gallery Press. Fiona Benson's poem, Big Dipper Fireflies, is from Ephemeron, published by Jonathan Cape in 2022. Copyright Fiona Benson. It was aired with the permission of the author, care of Rogers, Coleridge and White. Coming up next week, poet Nithi Kassa talks about the challenge of balancing her life, identity and work between Dublin and the Democratic Republic of Congo. Make sure to subscribe to The Glimpse wherever you get your podcasts. You can also find episodes on our website, brinkerhoffpoetry.org/podcast. We'd also love to hear from you. Drop us an email at theglimpsepoetrypodcast@gmail.com. The Glimpse is a production of the Adrian Brinkerhoff Poetry Foundation. I'm your host, Seán Hewitt. Our senior producer is Jennifer Wolfe. Kat Yore is our technical director and mixing engineer. Editorial director Amanda Glassman is our curator and production coordinator. Amy Holmes is the Foundation's executive director, and our co-founders are Kathy and Peter Halstead. Thanks for listening.